Well, I am happy to be here this morning because I can finally get that song out of my head that's been playing since I woke up. It's the final countdown, so that's good. My name is Josh. I'm the middle school director here, and when Fred asked me to come up here and preach, and I started thinking of what I was going to be saying, what it was going to be like to be up here speaking to you guys, I started changing my perspective. And so this morning, instead of viewing this as me stepping into large church and preaching to you guys, I'm just viewing it as another Sunday school and my middle schoolers expanding significantly. And if there's one thing I learned from going on Man Camp a couple weeks ago, it's that there's a lot more middle schoolers in this room than we're aware of. So if you guys are talking to your neighbors, I may ask you to sit somewhere else. If I see you guys are texting on your phone, the ushers will come forward and pick up your phone, and you can get it at the end of service. Well, when Fred asked me to preach on Hebrews chapter 11, also known as the Hall of Faith, it was funny, it was this Sunday of all Sundays, because a year ago, I had my first high school teaching experience. And as any one of them here can tell you, it went about as poorly and as terrible as you can imagine. I'd gone over what I was going to say, I'd rehearsed it, I felt confident, and yet I stepped up and I started talking, and I just watched their glazed eyes stare back at me, and it's the exact opposite of what I was used to with middle schoolers, and it completely threw me off my groove. And I was up there, and then I got a couple minutes, 3 minutes in? Not long, and then my message just went out the window. And I stood up there in silence for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and then I go, oh, hold on, I'll be right back. And I walked out of the room. This is a true story. I would not make this up. I left. I called Ron. I go, Ron, I just bailed on high school. I need you to come in and take over. And so Ron leaves the main service, and he comes in, and I just go and I sit in my car feeling terrible about what had happened. And, as word started spreading of what had gone on, it was Jen Miller, of all people, and she came up to me. If you know Jen, you know this is so her, and she said, Josh, you're going to go on to give incredible sermons, and God's going to use this very instance not to show off your skills or lack of, but to show God's glory and to show what he can do through anyone. And I remember she said that to me, and I just looked at her and went, no. No, there's no way I'm going to go up and give another sermon in front of a bunch of people. And yet, it's funny how the second we start telling God what we will or what we won't do, how he starts redirecting our steps. And so, as I said, it's a pleasure to be here before you guys this morning. And I've asked the ushers to lock the side doors so that no matter what happens up here on stage, we're all in this together for the next 20 minutes or so. As I said, we're going to be continuing on in Hebrews chapter 11. It's called the Hall of Faith. And we're going to be looking specifically at those first 6 verses, and I've broken them up into 3 different sections. Now, the first one is verses 1 through 3, as we talk about what faith is, what it looks like. The second part is verses 4 and 5, as we go into people whose actions of faith bore witness, not just in their time, but to us now, reading about them thousands of years later. And then we're going to conclude with verse 6, as we just talk about what godly faith is, what it looks like, what kind of faith draws us closer to God. And so as we start off in verse 1 through 3, it says this, now faith is the confidence in what we hope for, and the assurance what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was created at God's command, so what is seen was not made out of what is visible. Now I want to direct your attention to this first word that says confidence. Some Bible translations differ. Some say assurance, some say substance. But the Greek word that it pulls from is hypostasis, and if you'll bear with me as I sound like Ron for a couple minutes, when we break this word apart, we get 2 parts. We get hippo, which you guys know is an African animal capable of speeds of up to 30 miles an hour. But in this situation, hippo means underneath or below. And stasis means like pillar. It's a solid structure. And so when we put this together, we have this solid foundation that keeps us up, and that's what our faith is. It's important to know what this word is specifically because of what was going on, the audience that the author of Hebrews was writing to. See, during this time, the church was going through a storm of persecution. We're seeing that more and more people are beginning to switch away from Christianity, what they couldn't see, and putting their faith and trust into Judaism, what they could see. And so the author, he specifies this, he writes it out to address why faith is important and to talk about the current situation of people switching over from Christianity to Judaism. If we continue on, it says, faith is confidence in what we hope for and the assurance of what we do not see. Now, believe it or not, but this is not a definition of what faith is, but this is a description of what faith does. I'll say that again. It's not a definition of what faith is, but it's a description of what faith does. See, when we have real and authentic faith, when we exercise this, we get the confidence in the things that we hope for. We get the confidence that Jesus came and he lived. The confidence that he died and rose again on the third day for our sins, conquering death. And we get the confidence that one day he's going to come back. It gives us the assurance for things that we can't see. You know, that's his Holy Spirit in us, amongst us, working through us day to day, drawing us closer to him and guiding our steps. And while it's important to know what faith is, it's also important to kind of touch on things that faith aren't. See, true and biblical faith, it's not just this blind optimism. It's not a manufactured, oh, I hope so feeling. Neither is it an intellectual assent to a doctrine, and it's not believing in spite of evidence. That's known as superstition. When I was younger, I was really into snowboarding. I lived up in the mountains, and my family and I would go up skiing each weekend. I remember one weekend I really wanted to buy a new pair of bindings, and that's what straps your boot into the snowboard, what keeps you secure. So I went to my dad, and I was talking to him. Hey, Dad, I want to go and buy these bindings. And he said, okay, son, save up $100, reach $100, and then we'll go in and we'll buy them. I said, okay. So I saved, and I saved, and I saved. And then finally, just to go and check it out, I walked into the store because I wanted to just look at them. And I walked in and I said, hey, can I see the bindings? And they said, sorry, they're all sold out. They're gone. And I'm just feeling devastated, frustrated, even mad at my dad. Like, you told me we were going to go and get them, and they're all sold out. So I went to my dad and I talked to him, and he just looked at me and said, son, just keep having faith. Just keep trusting me and keep saving. But I couldn't, because I couldn't have faith in what I couldn't see. It was hard. But see, our belief, our faith, it's not even based on our reality, but it's based on God's reality. It's based on his established and everlasting government. And our Christian hope, our Christian faith, it's a belief in the Spirit against our senses. See, our senses tell us to grab what you can see, taste, touch, get it all in. And if you guys remember, or if you've seen the movie Dead Poets Society, you're probably aware of that famous poem by Robert Herrick that goes, gather you rosebuds while ye may, old time is still a-flying, and that same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. See, it's telling us to make the most of now, to carpe diem, to seize the day, to go in and grab it. But, you know what's crazy about that is that with our faith, we don't have to worry about that. Dr. J. Oswald Sanders had a great quote, and he said, faith enables the believing soul to treat the future as present and to treat the invisible as seen. I think that's a great quote. See, when we have faith, we don't need to worry about death, where we're going to end up, what's on the other side, because we know what awaits us. And so the author of Hebrew right now, he's calling us to live purely, wholeheartedly, authentically by our faith. And I think in modern times, this same faith could be kind of relatable to what we as Warriors fans have, knowing they're going to win another championship next year. Verse 4 then says, by faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous, and God spoke well of his offerings. By faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. And by faith, Enoch was taken from life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found, for God had taken him away. And before he was taken, he was commending as one who pleased God. See, here we begin to see a couple examples of people who have gone on before us, who have kept the faith. And we're going to take a look at Cain and at Abel. And you know, in Matthew 23:35, it says that Abel was a man who loved God. He was a man of faith, a righteous man. But in 1 John 3:12, it says that his brother Cain wasn't. It says that he was not a child of God. And so we have like this tale of two cities, if you will. And God comes to him and he says, I want you to give a sacrifice to me. I want you to give me a sacrifice. And so they each come forward, and we see that Abel gives God a living sacrifice, but Cain brings him like fruits from his garden, what he's created. And God looks at Abel and he says, good job, I'm pleased with your offering, but he's not with Cain. And it's important to note that each of them understood the sacrifice that God was asking them to bring. Each of them understood the substitutionary atoning nature of a blood sacrifice, because this had already been established with their parents, with Adam and Eve, when they were kicked out of the garden and God gave them animal skins to clothe themselves. And so they each understood, and when Abel comes in, he comes in with a spirit of humility, of submission, turning toward God and saying, God, I'm going to do this your way. I'm going to give up a sacrifice. It's something that I value. It's something that I'm not going to get back, but I'm doing this because I know that you bless me with this. And yet Cain comes in, and by giving God like the produce of his garden, it's as if he's saying one's own works are enough to get you into heaven. One's own works are enough to please God, to make him happy, and they're not. God calls for sincere and authentic faith. And even though it's Abel's faith that eventually led him to his death, his murder was not enough to keep his story from being told. We continue on as it talks about Enoch and how he loved God. He was a man after God's heart. And in Genesis 5:24, it says he was a man who walked with God. And if we take a look at this metaphor, walking with God, it more accurately just shows how he pleased God. Because if you think about walking with somebody, there's a few basic elements that you need to have. First of all, you must be walking in the same direction. You must be going in the same path. Anybody who's walked a dog like a real large dog understands the struggle of when a squirrel runs across the path. When you have a large dog, not a small little Joe Romanello's dog, but like an over 50-pound animal, it takes you away. It's hard to stay on that path. The second thing is that you have to be going the same speed. Joe's still staring at me. It's not funny second service. When you're walking the same speed, you're going step by step, following in line with that person. And then the third thing is there has to be a mutual agreement of the souls. You can't be walking with somebody you hate. You have to be in fellowship. You have to love one another. And so we see that Enoch was a man who walked with God. And our faith grows. Our faith expands as we walk with God, as we continue to seek after him. It then says that Enoch, he lived in a sinful time. He lived in a world prior to the flood when it was full of sin and corruption. And I think for our times, if we were to kind of bring that same principle of a place that you don't want to be, a place you don't want to live in, that would be like Bakersfield or maybe Stockton or something like that. And so we see that Enoch was living in a time that was hard to live as a Christian. And when I think of just living wholeheartedly by faith for 1 year, man, that's tough. That's difficult. And yet it says that Enoch walked with God for 365 years. That's a long time. And then at the end, his death is one rarely seen in the Bible, except for prophet Elijah. It says that God took him away, that he didn't experience death. This highly contrasts Abel's death, which was violent and bloody. But I think Abel's death is key for us because our faith isn't always going to get us out of harm. Our faith isn't always going to get us out of danger. And more often than not, our faith is what's going to lead us through trials, through persecution. And so it's important to see that, while some people were taken away, there were others, including Jesus' own disciples, who were beheaded, who were tortured, persecuted, sawn in two. 1 Peter verse 4, 13, 14 says, "But rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted because of the name of the Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and the Spirit of God rests upon you." It's always been a battle to keep our faith. It always has been, and it always will be. See, the war has never stopped being waged. It's just taken a different form. It just looks different now than it did thousands of years ago. Back in 1954, everybody in the world thought that it was impossible to break a 4-minute mile. They tried and they tried and they tried, and nobody could do it. It wasn't until May 6th of 1954 that Britain's Roger Bannister stepped up, and he raced with his whole heart and soul and crossed the finish line at 3:59.4. He did it, the first sub 4-minute mile. And to try and see how hard this was, I tried to talk Fred and Ron into running with me at the track to see if we too could break a 4-minute mile. But Fred said he'd done that the day before and he was sore, so I couldn't. But, our walk of faith is kind of similar to this. Because when you look at the world we live in, we see the corruption, the broken homes and families, the broken churches and the broken people, and we say, how are we supposed to live a life of faith? How are we supposed to live in this world above reproach, But just as Roger Bannister broke this seemingly impossible record that inspired thousands of others to go on and do the same, we too can take heart that there are others who have gone before us. There are others who have gone and fought the good fight, who have kept the faith, who have finished the race. And these stories of men and women who stayed strong in the Lord, they're not just in the Bible, but they're here right now. They're in this very church, sitting in this congregation. There are men and women who are seeking after God, who in the midst of trials and struggles, anything that Satan would have thrown their way, and they're choosing instead to say, I'm going to put my trust, my hope, and my strength in Jesus Christ. And that is encouraging, let me just say. That is hopeful and that is inspiring to see that people in this church are acting the same kind of faith. But it's not just about our faith individually. It's about our faith as an entire church. It's about our faith as we come together and we support one another. We give strength to one another. We love one another. And we continue on growing our faith. I'll say it again. Our faith, it's this solid foundation. It's what holds our Christianity up. And when we have a solid and a firm foundation, that's a rock that not even the toughest storms are going to be able to wash away or budge. Finally, wrapping up in verse 6, it says this: without faith, it's impossible to please God. Because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Now, if we look at this first part, it says that the only way to please God is to have faith. It doesn't matter what job you have. It doesn't matter how much scripture you know, how much money you make. It says, no. The only way that you can please me is if you have this real and authentic faith. And it reminds me of there's two levels to this faith. The first level, it's this. It's not that there's this God who exists, but it's that there's this all-powerful, unimaginable creator of everything, that he spoke me and you into existence, and that he's alive right now working in our hearts. The second part, it's similar to it, and it's found in Colossians 1, verse 17. And it says that in him and through him all things hold together, and that he is before all things. See, there's this God of creation. There's this God of wonder, king of the entire universe. And out of any possible thing that he could have, he says, I want you. I want a relationship with you. But this can't happen unless we have faith. It reminds me of a moment last weekend when I was up visiting my family. We had some friends who were over for the weekend, and it was a pretty hot day, so I thought we'd go down to the river to cool off. And this spot in the river, it's really cool. As the stream comes in, it kind of opens up, and there's this deep, cool swimming pool, and there's rocks on either side, and you can jump off the rocks and go swimming. It's a ton of fun. So we went down there, and I'm excited. I can't wait. We go in there, and I jump off, and I'm swimming, and I'm climbing up and jumping out. And a couple minutes go by, and I look back, and everybody else is still on the edge. They haven't jumped off yet. They haven't dived in. I remember there was this moment with my sister. Her name's Deb, and I was swimming down below, and she was on this rock up above me. And we're saying, come on, jump, come join me. And, she's nervous. She's kind of timid. Okay, a countdown, 3, 2, 1. And then, no, I'm not going to do it. And, that keeps going on. And I remember that moment because, more than just her jumping off, I wanted to hang out with her. I hadn't seen her in a while. I just wanted to be in fellowship with her. I wanted to be side by side with her, to talk and to hang out. And this is kind of the exact same thing that this verse is getting at, the same type of faith. See, God's saying, he's like, I want this relationship with you. I don't want you to be up there on the cliff. I want you to be here by my side so that we can have fellowship, so that we can hang out. But man, the only way that's going to happen is if you take this leap of faith. The only way that's going to be possible is if you trust me and if you jump out and you join me. And that can be tough and that can be scary. And as much as God wants us to have faith in him, more than that, he wants a relationship with us. He says, I want to be a part of your life. That's what I want more than anything in the world. But this can't happen unless you have faith in me. This can't happen unless you believe and you trust in me. And, earlier I talked about the snowboard bindings. I talked about my parents and went and buy these bindings. And, I kept saving. And then finally, I reached the goal. I reached $100. So I went to my dad and said, okay, Dad, let's go and we'll buy another pair of bindings or something. He goes, hold on, son. And he walks into his closet and he pulls this box off the top shelf. And he brings it back to me and he hands it to me. and it's the same pair of bindings. See, my dad had already gone out and he'd already bought those bindings before I even earned the money. He was just saying, son, I want you to come and have faith. I want you to trust in me that you're going to work, but there's going to be this reward at the end. But I couldn't. It was really hard because I didn't have faith, because I had doubt. But funny thing is that actually doubt and faith they go hand in hand. You can't have real and authentic faith unless there's a little bit of doubt there too. Because if there wasn't doubt, we wouldn't have faith. All that we'd be left with is logic and reasoning. And in a similar sense, God, he's saying, man, I want you to have faith in me. I want you to trust in me. And if you follow after my name, there's going to be trials. You're going to go through some hard things in life. But just like me and my dad, he says, I have this reward for you that's at the end. I have this prize above all other prizes. You can't even imagine it. And it's for an eternity. And it's going to be epic. But you have to trust in me. You have to have faith in me. And he'll reward us. And I promise you that when that day comes, it's going to be worth it. When Dan came up here a while back, he talked about legends, talked about creating legends. And if we look at biblical legends, the Pauls, Peter, Davids, all these people, they weren't legends because of how good their hair looked, because of how many battles they'd fought and won, or because of how wealthy they were. But man, they were legends because in the midst of trials, they sought after God, that they went counterculture and they pursued God for their source of strength and refuge above everything else. And that's what made them legends. Here at Gateway, what an epic vision that would be, to be filled with legends, filled with warriors and leaders who trusted in God, who prayed in the midst of trials, who loved during persecution, who put one another before ourselves, and above everything else, we loved God with our whole hearts. And that's my prayer for this church. And that's what we have the capability of becoming, even more so than we are right now, because there are some legends here in this church. There are some incredible men and women who are fighting the good fight and are keeping the faith. And so as Dave comes back up here to close us in worship, I just want to leave you with this last kind of train of thought. I want you to think about your faith. I want you to think about kind of faith that you're exercising and what kind of legend you're going to become. What story are you going to leave behind? Because it all starts with us, right here, right now. Thank you.